The free trials in Japan have ended, and we have seen everything. 4 red flags in the FP2, including the sensational accident of Duan. Luckily, the pilot is fine. In turn 1, where he kept the drag reduction system open, he entered the turn and then lost control of the single-seater and went against the barriers. Later, we will look at everything in detail. We saw a McLaren that objectively proved to be superior to all the others, but with a very close Ferrari, the balance is good. In fact, Ferrari finished the FP2 in 4th and 7th position, and this is good because we saw a well-balanced Ferrari. If we want, we saw a different behavior between Leclerc and Hamilton. Later, we will also look at the telemetry to analyze all the data in detail. However, we saw Ferrari that was strong in the first sector. In the snake, the weak point, if we want, were a bit the slow curves. Vasseur also highlighted it, but we found a Ferrari in front of the opponents, Mercedes, Red Bull. They are all very close. The gaps are narrow, but Ferrari believes to be the second force this weekend. We will also see it during the weekend, and be careful that the weather conditions will also change. If you like the videos, please leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any Formula 1 themed videos. So let's analyze all the details. First, I'll show you the times. Free practice 1, we immediately saw a McLaren up front. Norris, watch out for Russell, who many have defined as a bit underrated driver, but he is a driver who is still carrying forward Mercedes. In this case, a driver who has been playing the role of second force since the beginning of the season. So we have Norris first, Russell second, Hamilton third and fourth, who still made a good time, then Verstappen fifth, Tsunoda sixth. Interesting to see how Tsunoda in his Red Bull debut immediately got close to Verstappen. In free practice 1, we have Alonso 7th, Aguiara 8th, Antonelli 9th, Sainz 10th, and so on, all the others. Let's look at the times of FP2, which are even more significant, and then they also give us a mirror of what the qualifying times are, because it did a qualifying simulation for everyone. Piastri takes first, Norris second in a strong showing for McLaren as anticipated in Japan. It's the track par excellence for the MCL39 because there are many fast curves, many support curves. You need to have a good aerodynamic load. McLaren has demonstrated its strength by being more charged than its rivals, performing well where high lateral grip was necessary. Then third to JAR, which is a bit of the surprise of the day, but we saw good Racing Bulls, 4th Hamilton, 5th Lawson, 6th Russell, 7th Leclerc, and so on. All the others we have seen, so 4th Hamilton and 7th Leclerc, who, however, have a very good uptime idea. In fact, they both did well. Leclerc the first sector, a bit did well, Hamilton the curves after. So the spoon, we also saw the hairpin, let's say the weak point we saw of Ferrari is a bit the slow part of the circuit. This was also said by Vasseur because we saw a well-balanced Ferrari, also the very precise front end, with Hamilton who suffered a little more understeer compared to Leclerc. However, the Ferrari still found itself well on the dry lap in the sense that it found more speed even in braking. More speed on entry, we struggle a bit more. In traction, in this case, however, the main problems were the hairpin and the final chicane. We will also see it later with the times. However, we have seen these are the times of free practice 1 with 3rd and 4th Hamilton and Leclerc. Here we see Hamilton coming out of the pits. We also saw the radio communications between Hamilton and Leclerc during the race pace simulation done in free practice 1 with Leclerc going a bit faster. In the fast curves, Hamilton was going a bit faster in the slow curves. In short, both drivers complement each other. If we want to, indeed, if you put together Hamilton's lap and Leclerc's lap, you get a good lap for the second force. Considering individual laps, Ferrari is the 3rd or 4th strongest team there in the fight with Mercedes and Red Bull. But if you put the whole package together, it turns out to be the second force. On this track here, McLaren seems to be superior from what we've seen in free practice 1 and FP2. However, we should keep an open mind as the track conditions may change throughout the weekend with increasing grip levels due to rubber buildup. And also pay attention to another thing. For Sunday, rain is expected. In fact, this is the weather forecast from Formula 1 for this weekend. Friday and Saturday are clear, and instead, Sunday, rain. So be careful, because if it were to happen, it would change the whole scenario. Because anyway, we see the teams with a reference in the free trials, and then it totally changes with the rain. Sunday. And we'll see who could go faster. Maybe the slightly heavier cars could go faster. So the overall balance of Ferrari is still positive. I want to emphasize this because both Hamilton and Leclerc said it in the post-practice interviews, and Vasseur also said it that the balance has improved compared to Australia and China. However, there is still a bit of work to do, especially in the slow corners. And now let's look at the telemetry to see in detail the differences between the various drivers. We start with Verstappen, Norris, and Leclerc. On the less rubberized track of free practice, teams like Red Bull, McLaren, and Ferrari make the difference in performance. We see that in the snake, Leclerc lost a bit more in free practice one. It was a fairly critical point, and it is where he manages to accuse a bit more of a gap towards McLaren. Red Bull faces some challenges with Verstappen, though not as much as Ferrari. Moving forward, we see that in the stream, Ferrari doesn't lose that much. Even if it's a slow curve, it recovers a lot on entry, but loses quite a bit on exit. And if we go ahead with the telemetry, we see that Leclerc struggles a bit more at the spoon, which is this curve here. A double left in support where Leclerc makes the difference, and he's made it all weekend so far. So watch out that Leclerc at the spoon has an extra gear compared to the opponents. He manages to go more
strong. Let's see.
Moving forward, that Leclerc manages to recover at the last chicane. So in this case, we see that the gap accused to Leclerc from the Ferrari-McLaren comparison in free practice one mainly loses in the first sector. In the snake, in the second sector, manages to maintain some unchanged gaps, loses a bit in this right support curve. You see that the speed of travel is less, and Torrentino manages to do it quite well also. The last chicane manages to do it quite well. Moving on to the comparison between Verstappen, Red Bull, Norris, McLaren, and Leclerc, Ferrari in FP2 with times of 1:28.6, 1:28.1, and 1:28.5 respectively. Leclerc significantly improved in the first sector. The snake after Ferrari changed the balance between free practice 1 and FP2 in the end, 0.014 seconds compared to McLaren in the first sector. Then in this right support curve, Leclerc struggles a bit more, even more Verstappen if we see from the graphic. And moving forward in the hairpin, also Leclerc loses in this case against McLaren, so Norris, because Ferrari has gone to favor the first sector, so from the snake it has gone to sacrifice a bit more the slow curves. In fact, if Leclerc hadn't lost so much time in the hairpin and final chicane before, in the FP2, he lost a bit more time in the hairpin and the last chicane, but not significantly. In the spoonware, he keeps the gap fairly unchanged and goes to recover. In fact, coming out of the hairpin, he also goes to recover if we want in the stretch, so where efficiency is needed here, Leclerc has lost something, but we see that anyway as top speed, we are mainly all in line. The teams are quite aligned. In fact, McLaren is the one that has a bit more aerodynamic load and also a little more drag. Compared to the opponents, however, it goes to recover. A lot then of load in the various curves. Let's go ahead and see the comparison between Leclerc and Hamilton. This is very interesting because we see a Ferrari split in two. If we put together the idea to the uptime, that is the ideal lap of Leclerc, and Hamilton comes out the perfect lap. Let's say the lap that would bring Ferrari to be effectively second force. If instead it keeps the lap separate with Leclerc and Hamilton, we see that Leclerc goes very strong in the first sector and loses at some point. Hamilton recovers at other points, but at the end of the first sector, after also this curve in support, we see that Leclerc gains 80 thousandths. This curve in support where Hamilton still struggles a bit, and that fast curve in support to the right before the tunnel, before the part where they pass under the bridge. And there, that curve to the right, Hamilton struggles a bit more because he has a bit more understeer compared to Leclerc. At the hairpin turn, Leclerc loses significant ground to Hamilton, indicating that Hamilton's setup remains similar to free practice one compared to Leclerc's. However, moving on to the spoon, Hamilton loses a lot. He even loses 6.21 miles difference between the two drivers, and in fact there, the Leclerc manages to recover a lot, and arriving at the hairpin turn instead, at the hairpin turn if we want, Hamilton manages to gain a little more compared to the Leclerc in the
hole, so
the two drivers manage to make the lap time at different points on the track. In the first sector, they are quite similar, even though they have a different behavior. If we really see how they tackle the snake's curves, with Hamilton bringing more speed in progress, while he loses, however, at the last curve of the snake, he really loses a lot, while the Leclerc is a bit more consistent. If we want in the various slow curves, Hamilton is better than the Leclerc, and in the support curves, the Leclerc is better than Hamilton. Let's move on with the comparison between Piastri, Russell, Hamilton, and Leclerc, because I presented this comparison here because it is fundamental to understand the difference between Ferrari and Mercedes, that today Mercedes seems to be stronger than Red Bull as it fights to be the second force behind McLaren. So we have McLaren, then Ferrari and Mercedes very similar, and then we have Red Bull. So let's see the difference together with Piastri 1.2, 8.1. While the others have done a very similar time, Russell 1.28.5, Hamilton 1.28.5, Leclerc 1.28.5. Let's look at the times together. We see that Mercedes goes very strong in the first sector, but loses in the slow corners, so it loses at the hairpin, it loses in this right-hand support curve. Mercedes struggles more with braking, especially in areas requiring significant braking and in the last chicane compared to their competitors. Also at the spoon, and this is the crucial point, look here, if we look at the gap, where does McLaren gain on all the other teams? mainly at the spoon, guys. So the double left turn is where McLaren gains the most of all. It's the most important point where Ferrari and Mercedes lose the most in comparison of McLaren. The gap before this spoon is about 67 thousandths against Russell, 52 thousandths against Hamilton, and 122 thousandths against Leclerc. At the end of the spoon, the gap is about 3/10 against all opponents. So the gap increases by more than 2/10 just in 2 curves practically. That's where they set the lap time with McLaren, an interesting point to note. Let's look at the difference between Verstappen and Tsunoda, and we see that in free practice 1, they made a very similar time, 1.2, 9.0, 1.2, 9.1 Tsunoda, a sign that Tsunoda is getting used to this Red Bull a bit faster than Yuson.
RB21 very latest.
Lastly, I forgot to show you a fundamental comparison between Piastri, Russell, Hamilton, and Leclerc regarding the difference with the gears. In fact, we see that in the first sector, Hamilton uses 1 less gear, just as Piastri does in the Snake, while Leclerc tends to use 1 more gear. Russell also uses 1 less gear, while Leclerc uses 1 more gear compared to the opponents. We also find this in the right-leaning curve. At the hairpin turn, Hamilton uses 1 more gear than the other drivers. The others, and like Russell too. Moving on to the spoon, we see that Piastri uses 4th gear like Russell, while the 2 Ferrari drivers both use a 5th gear, so they do have more speed, but they have less traction on exit, if you will, and then you carry this forward for the entire next straightaway, towards the 130R. So that's where Hamilton loses a lot. Hamilton loses a lot at the spoon, especially in the exit part, if you will, because it's all a stretch that then you do the 130R from, you do very fast. So it's all that part there where Hamilton loses a lot to his opponents. I also want to show you the race pace, but first let's also look at Duan's accident. We need to analyze it in detail. And it was an accident, guys. I was scared because it was a strong hit against the barriers, a devastating impact. Let's see why he doesn't take the grass. I mean, he doesn't take the left part off the track. As he goes to take it, he loses control of the single-seater. It's at the limit. However, he doesn't take the grass. He just loses control of the single-seater because the drag reduction system is still open, which is clearly visible from the steering wheel because the drag reduction system light is on. This one here, okay? And we move on, we see that he barely touches the brake, but it seems that he practically didn't even touch it, and therefore the drag reduction system doesn't deactivate immediately, it deactivates a moment later, and therefore he loses control of the single-seater and has a sudden counter-steering that then takes him against the barriers. Look at the very fast impact, a sensational impact. Luckily the driver is okay, but it's really scary to see this accident. I'll also show you other images from the outside. This image that we saw is Duan's accident. Even here, when the driver is rescued, he is okay, so there are no problems about that. But damn, it's incredible how these Formula 1 single-seaters are so safe, in the sense you have such a powerful accident with such a big impact and the driver is okay. All thanks also to the halo, obviously. I always like to repeat, because it's a fundamental component in Formula 1. And so we saw an FP2 in short with many red flags. This is a meme that was going around that there were 4 red flags in the FP2 that stopped the session. And we also saw many mistakes. We also saw, for example, Alonso's mistake. I'll show you that he really goes to touch the external grass. I'll show here. He really gets the grass, you see here, with the left front, loses control from the single-seater, and then goes straight into the gravel. So, but there have been many mistakes by the drivers. Also, because the track is not very rubberized, and so it's more slippery, and we've seen various mistakes by the various drivers. It was also nice to hear Hamilton in the post-free practice interview, because he said, I still have to get used to the car. The comparison is not yet with the opponents, but the comparison is with myself. I need to improve in driving, and this is what Hamilton is focusing on so much. He wants to improve. I also want to show you the last thing, the race pace. So let's go see the race pace shown by the drivers, and let's make a comparison on everyone. And I also show the idea to the uptime, which are 2 very, very interesting data. Let's also see the comparison between the various sectors in FP2. I put it on the right. So you see that in the first sector, Leclerc has the best first sector in 36, which is in line with that of Russell. As I told you, Russell is the best in the first sector. But why does Leclerc manage to do such a good first sector, but not always manage to do it? Because the car is nervous, and so he did it once. However, he can't replicate it that easily. Let's see instead. 37th in Sector 2. McLaren shines with Hamilton at 42 and Norris at 39.8, 39.9 in Sector 3, 17.2, 17.4, and Antonelli is also quick. However, Ferrari struggles more in Sector 3, especially at the spoon exit and final chicane due to a stiff suspension, making it difficult in slow corners and chicanes. However, let's go see there from the uptime. That is very interesting to see the difference and where Ferrari is stronger, but above all, putting the lap together. If we exclude the uptime, we see Norris and Piastri in the top 2 positions, confirming McLaren's current superiority. Ferrari is second with Leclerc in third and Hamilton in fifth. Ayara is a surprise and Lawson also impresses. However, Ferrari is ahead of Russell, so be careful that with the idea to the uptime we are very close, especially considering that everyone has maximized their own idea to the uptime except Norris, who is more than 3/10, and Leclerc, who has more than a 10th, so Leclerc also has a bit more of an advantage if we want compared to the pursuers. Leclerc seems to be more of a pursuer if you put the lap together, and here you see what I was telling you earlier in the communications. T11, so turn 11 brake a little earlier and focus on phase 3 of the turn, so on the exit. So he has the Leclerc asking him to go faster to find the time on exit rather than on entry. While Hamilton is complaining a bit about understeer, as I said, he needs to carry more speed through turn 8. Track engineers have communicated with Leclerc and Hamilton about their driving style differences. Hamilton's style is similar to Leclerc's but less aggressive on the brakes, allowing him to manage tires better, especially during race pace management. Let's also look at the lap times in the race pace simulation of Free Practice 1. We see Russell 1.33.3, 1.33.5, 1.33.2, 1.33.1, 1.33, 1.32.9, 1.32.9, 1.34.7, a slightly slower lap, 1.33.5, and then 1.33.5, so an average on the low 33s, let's say. Leclerc, on the other hand, 1.33.5, 1.33.2, slow lap, 1.39.6, then 1.33.7, 1.33.5, 1.33.2, 1.33.5, so 33.5, about 0.2 slower. Hamilton's lap times: 34.4, 34.3, 33.6, 33.6, 33.4, and 33.0. After a slow 38.4 lap, average pace around 33.5. The chasers have similar pace, with McLaren superior in race pace and qualifying. Ferrari and Mercedes battle for second, while Red Bull chases behind. Tell me in the comments what you think of these free trials. Do you think Ferrari can aim for the podium, be the second force, be the chaser of McLaren? Can it even aim for victory? Tell me your predictions in the comments. I'm curious. Reading and responding to everyone. As always, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos that come out on this channel. Every day I keep you updated on all the Formula 1 news and specifically on Ferrari. That's all from Rastro. See you in the next video.